Good evening, I'm Len Cannon in the KHU11 newsroom on KHU11 Plus tonight, where we are following a highly watched and highly publicized Texas death row case. Let's get you up to speed because there have been a lot of moving developments since earlier this evening. Tonight, the scheduled execution of Texas death row inmate Robert Roberson is on hold as various legal maneuvers play out. That's because a Travis County judge granted a temporary restraining order in the execution that happened at about 4:45 this afternoon. That's only about an hour and 15 minutes before he was scheduled to be put to death in Huntsville. His case gaining national attention after he was convicted of killing his 2-year-old daughter back in 2003 in the East Texas town of Palestine. His execution, the first in the nation, would be connected to dangerous shaken baby syndrome. Now, since his conviction, many experts have dismissed what's called the shaken baby syndrome as junk science. Also, his defense attorneys have claimed the little girl died from pneumonia. Stephen Goin has been in Huntsville all day following this case. Stephen, explain where we are now in this legal back and forth with Robert Roberson.
Well, Len, it's been a fast-moving day, a lot of developments. We've been even speaking to some lawmakers out here in Huntsville in front of the building where Roberson is scheduled to be executed. And even they told us that they didn't quite know what exactly was happening. Essentially, what happened with this restraining order, it actually started earlier in the week. We know that yesterday, a Texas House committee voted to subpoena Robert Roberson, asking him to come and testify in front of them about some of the details of this case about shaken baby syndrome. So then today, a lawmaker filed an appeal, essentially wanting Roberson to be able to do that testimony to make that subpoena happen, So the judge today granted that temporary restraining order to allow Roberson to testify at that hearing on Monday. But legal experts that we have talked to say this may just be a last-minute attempt to try and stop this execution. We know that Governor Abbott is really the only one who could delay this. If he wanted to, he could grant a reprieve. That would be a 30-day pause. But in his long tenure as governor, he has only ever stopped one execution before. Len.
All right, Stephen Goin, thank you for the update. A lot of hurdles for Robert Roberson to have to climb tonight. One of those, as Stephen just mentioned, was the Court of Pardon and Parole. They unanimously voted against stopping the execution. The U.S. Supreme Court has refused to step in. Governor Greg Abbott, as Stephen mentioned, has decided he is not going to step in. So the only chance he has is with the Criminal Court of Appeals, which will weigh on this temporary restraining order. So what this means in terms of tonight, the death warrant is in effect, we're told, until midnight. So Robert Roberson, imagine, is in Huntsville at the prison with the guards all on standby, waiting to be executed and waiting to get word from the Court of Criminal Appeals in Texas to weigh on this temporary restraining order. The execution could still happen tonight. We talked to our legal analyst, Carmen Rowe, earlier today, who kind of explained the process. Weigh in. The Attorney General says he might, the Criminal Court of Appeals might. What's next?
So we're waiting for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals to receive the Attorney General's appeal of that temporary restraining order. And we can anticipate that it's very likely, in my experience, that we will see something like a writ of prohibition overturning that temporary restraining order in the next couple of hours. And keep in mind that the death warrant for Mr. Roberson is good until 12:01.
Now, Carmen, the Supreme Court already denied the request. What do you think the Supreme Court likely based their decision on?
So the Supreme Court made very clear that they denied this request for a stay because no federal claims were actually made, which is the jurisdictional range that they could have granted a stay. But Sotomayor went out of her way to talk about the credible claims of actual innocence with Mr. Roberson in urging the governor to step in tonight.
You heard Carmen talk about it. Attorney General Ken Paxton has filed an appeal with the Criminal Court of Appeals to end this temporary restraining order in the conviction, or not the conviction, but the execution of Robert Roberson in Huntsville. If that happens tonight, they have until midnight to carry out the execution. So we're still waiting. We've got a few hours to go. Stephen Goin, let's go back to you in Huntsville. You mentioned earlier, Stephen, there are some protesters there. What are they saying? How many are there?
There's a small group of protesters, Len, maybe about 30 or 40 people out here, including members of Roberson's own family. We did hear I believe it was his sister-in-law speak out a little bit earlier today. And then there's other protesters who kind of go to executions, they say, across the state, trying to make sure that they stop. They go to executions across the country as well. So they came here today essentially for that purpose. They want to stop this execution. They are mentioning some of the new evidence, with the shaken baby syndrome theory being considered now junk science, that science not holding up. They're bringing that up, and they were essentially just wanting to make sure that Robert Roberson does get justice in this case, Len.
Stephen Goin, live in Huntsville tonight and on standby as we wait to find out what happens in this legal process in an effort to either continue with the execution of Robert Roberson, once again accused, convicted back in 2003 in Palestine, Texas, of shaking his 2-year-old daughter to death. Now the science of shaken baby syndrome called into question. Also, his own lawyers said that the little girl died of pneumonia. So some doubt there, which is why all of these legal ramifications have popped up here at the last minute. So we'll continue to follow this, and we'll have the very latest coming up on KHOU 11 News at 10. By then, we may have a resolution whether the TRO, the temporary restraining order, will continue for an indefinite period of time, or whether the Criminal Court of Appeals in Texas will deny that restraining order and carry out the execution tonight. We will have it all